Hello. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is impact investing. So for all of you out there, I hope that you are interested to learn about impact investing and three different, related but different approaches with some cousins within the community. Yeah, we've got some pretty interesting stories, and actually we were just sitting downstairs waiting to be called up here, and if our panel's half as interesting as that preliminary conversation, I think we're in for a treat this afternoon. For joining us, my name is Christy Davis. I have the pleasure of hosting this, moderating this panel here, and I'm going to ask. We're going to kind of set this up where each of our investors is going to share a bit about just the fundamentals of their fund, their approach, their philosophy, and why they got into this. Why are they choosing to be an impact investor? So we'll start with that, and then we're going to kind of just unpack it a bit more and explore, and we'll have plenty of time for questions from you. So we'd love for this just to be rather informal and interactive, and feel free just to, as you have questions, just to raise your hands and we can incorporate those. So I'd like to kick it off with the senior member of the panel, Mr. Mason Tan. And Mason, why don't you just introduce yourself, your fund, why you're doing this, your approach, your philosophy, some of those fundamentals.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chrissy. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mason. Currently, I run a social impact fund called Garden Impact Fund. It is registered in Singapore as part of a regulated fund. So we use the concept of what we call a variable capital company structure. It's more like an umbrella fund, and that we make our investments throughout in Southeast Asia. Just a quick snapshot, we are a 9+2 years fund. By the way, I'm not doing roadshow here, so I hope I'm not getting into trouble here. But more, regulator means I got to be very careful when I'm talking. I'm not a roadshow here anyway. But just to give you an idea what you're talking, well, it's a 9+2 years fund. We invest in 4 primary sectors: education, healthcare, circular economy, and employment services. They target the most common thing among all these investments is we are focusing on helping the vulnerable groups of people. We are considered as an impact first fund, meaning that our investors prioritize social impact returns over financial return. But it does not mean you do not need to generate financial return. You still need to generate a financial return. A very simple illustration is that when you talk to a typical PE fund, they are looking at the unicorn, which is delivering like maybe 10x, 20x return. But for us, if we can achieve 3 to 5x return, financial return over 8 to 10 years, we are very happy. And so I think this is just a very snapshot. But I think to answer the last question, why am I doing this? Because as part of my professional journey, I have become disillusioned. My training background is I'm an accountant and a corporate finance guy. I realized that I've been helping the rich people to become richer, and I should help more to the less privileged people. So I like to use my gifts to help more purpose-driven social enterprises instead of just pure profit-driven social enterprises. I shall pause here. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Mason. Okay, so from Singapore, let's travel to Cambodia. Ian.
I'm trying to work out where I do that introduction because I'm at the complete opposite. I started my career loading railway wagons. So always working with, on the ground sort of work. And the work that we're doing now is very much still working with a lot of underrepresented and marginalised communities in Cambodia. I have 2 entrepreneur support organisations. The first one works exclusively with entrepreneurs with disabilities, so we take a very big ecosystem approach to capacity building them to then go into incubators and accelerators. So that's Agile Development Group, and then I'm here today with Mekong Inclusive Ventures, which actually looks at basically developing ventures that provide employment and income for marginalised communities. So everything that we're driven by is about independence and opportunity. Like, I think we can always look at the ability of people and then sort of construct out from that employment opportunities and connections to markets. The big problem is, though, is lack of access to finance and the structures that currently exist. So I'm on this panel for the Adaptive Collective. We're a new movement, look us up. We now have a website. But it's, thanks. It's based on, ever since I started working with early stage impact ventures 12 years ago in Australia, there would always be the missing middle, right? Or the valley of death. And I think eventually, connecting to Shrivan from Climate in India at another program, we got sick of having it as a beer conversation. Like, what if and why can't we fix it? So together with Dr. Jody York from Kalara and Impactability in Australia, we wrote a report. So I printed out one prop, the demand-led investment report. You can download it from adaptivecollective.com. And from there, we spent a lot of time looking globally at where adaptive capital was occurring and definitely where there was blockages in the region. And so the report actually talks about what happens if you stop fixing the founders to get capital and forcing them through this narrow lens of what funders want. And from definitely a traditional sort of Western VC lens, right? Doesn't necessarily work in Cambodia or regionally in the Asian context. What if you actually fix the capital? So what we've now looking at is how do we look at adaptive capital? And what it looks at is early stage financing, and adaptation can come through a variety of ways. One is through adapting your mandate. The other one is through adapting through purpose or your mission, looking at the way that, I can't believe I've almost forgotten the 9 adaptations. But short version, looking at grace periods, reduced, my brain just totally stopped and I had so many coffees. So, okay, let me start again. The work that I do with Red Hat Impact in Australia, right? Syndicated, unsecured debt. It allows retail investors, the mums and pops, the PAFs, anyone that actually wants to say, right, I've made my money and then I'd like to put it back and get the returns and the impact, right? But when we look at that, we look at what is the adaptation we might need. Is there a 12-month repayment period, right? Is there reduced interest rates? And that's a nice balance between what the investors want and what the enterprise is going to give. But right through, it looks into how can you adapt different forms of mezzanine level capital as well. And we think there's a really big market around that. So to do that, what we realised was all of these things existed globally and definitely in South and Southeast Asia, but no one was recognising the different parts. So with the Adaptive Collective, yeah, we've just got our website up, but we're now forming a community of practice to say, hey, so Exchange in the Philippines, incredible stories at looking at 0% catalytic first loss capital, and you're loaning to founders and they're reusing it, they're paying it back, and then they're picking up equity investments. Same with Red Hat Impact, with financing deals in Kenya through Asia. And then Kayleen's in the audience today with Athena Global and Biduk Indonesia. I mean, if you want stats and data on the value of adaptive capital, unsecured loans, I mean, go and talk to Kayleen and Athena because it's all there. And what we're here and what we have on the slides that people can access, Red Hat will raise $1 million Australian this year out of small investors. Kayleen's got $1 million in vetted deals in the pipeline. So, by the time you add all these up regionally, it's not small chickens. But the question is, who is going to be the next financer to come and back early stage capital to keep the pipeline there?
And why are you doing this?
To be honest, all of my work's been around inclusion. I started off developing social enterprises for people with high severity mental illness. Then I moved to Cambodia. We supported NGOs that have worked with survivors of trafficking. And all of our work now is primarily around employment for people with disabilities. It takes a lot more money to provide the care and support. Funders don't fund that. So effectively the problem was I could keep building these ventures, but the dynamic in Cambodia won't fund those ventures. No money goes into disability, no money goes into early stage enterprise. So it's kind of like, well, if I have to fix this problem myself, well, why not let's try and fix the ecosystem as well.
Okay, back to Singapore. Leon.
Hi. Thanks for keeping me last, because I'm like the most complicated of the three of us, I guess.
I love that.
So, hi everyone. I'm Leon To. I am the managing partner for Damson Capital. We essentially have a couple of core beliefs. The first is that business models can change the world. If you're spending so much time doing it, using it, why don't we use it for good? And so how do we actually channel capital to businesses that will actually help achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? That's our core. We do it in three ways, framed in maybe three questions. The first is, how do we catalyze it? So we actually have a, similar to Mason, a licensed entity in Singapore where we also raise capital and we deploy that into companies. So that's one. Lots of problems and pain. Yeah, it's a nervous laughter everywhere. Okay, then the second is, so we raise funds and we deploy it. The second is, how do we actually create it ourselves? So we also, because of the nervous laughter, realized that not everybody wanted to do everything, so we just went out there and did our own. So we have a couple of our own companies as well that we pretty much have a strong mandate and holding for. And then the last is, how do we support their growth? And so there's one subsidiary where we do consulting and supporting of ESG and impact advisory work. So that's the three questions that we ask every day, and this is how we do it. And I think when we talk specifically about impact investment, just putting on the hat of the fund, what we raise from our investors is basically a concept called conscious wealth. Because yes, we talk about making a lot of money for people, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is that for every penny that you're putting at the table, that it's not only preventing harm, it's doing good. And it's easy for us to say that, but actually as practitioners, we know how hard that is, because sometimes if you put it into the open market or the public markets, you end up actually channeling it into companies which are cutting down forests, burning peatland. And in Singapore, we happen to have this habit of getting the haze and gray clouds, which don't smell good. So we don't want that to happen. So that's essentially the practice of conscious wealth that we're trying to do for our investors. As a core for our founders who are in the room, we look at companies who are a little bit more later stage. We do companies who are post revenue generating and have a slight track record, and we partner with them because we believe that we have an ability to support them to get to the next level, to get to much bigger check sizes. Hey, Mason. So he gives you the bigger check sizes, if you didn't know that, by the way. So he's quite important, okay? So, sorry, I have to do the plug. It's very important to me. So if you are in impact investing and you're starting off the journey, you want to be looking for someone like Ian. And then along the journey, after you've been working with Ian, you come to me, and then I help you get to the next level, and we put you in front of the big investors like Mason. So, or the great investors like Mason. And by the way, I'm very excited to be on this panel as well, because Mason was like the first person I spoke to when I got into my impact investment journey. So it's like speaking of your mentor or something. So this is great. So I think that for me is impact investing. So we work with founders. We really support them through our ecosystem, how we built them up. We do a lot of coaching, mentoring. We just don't have the ability to do it like TBN, which is fantastic with the coaching and all that. We just do it internally with what we can do for them in supporting them at the board level, supporting them with specific connections, and even synergizing with the rest of our portfolio if we can. So that's very functionally what I do on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully if you're not asleep, I'll tell you why I'm doing this. So why I'm doing this is my journey started as a Singaporean in a city, but actually venturing out for a couple years into Europe. I did a lot of post-conflict resolution programs in Europe, funded by the EU, and I was part of a facilitator. I saw a very different part of the world and was very empowered that we could do things differently and disrupt it. So we did a lot of post-conflict resolution programs in places like Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Italy, and between Israel-Palestine students as well. So that was a little bit of my 2-year experience in Europe. And then came back when I went into university in Australia, I met an econometrics professor who basically told me that statistics will change people's lives. And I got so suckered into it, right? I drank the Kool-Aid on that one. Because of that, I ended up, being a research assistant in Timor-Leste, studying coffee farmers, and trying to figure out how do we support smallholder farmers in the transition out of seasonal famine, which basically meant that for a couple months they'd be eating really well, and then for like 6 to 8 months sometimes they could be getting below average food needs, and that's really tough. So how do we support that? So I spent a bit of time doing that. I went into the corporate world and realized that it wasn't quite my calling as well, and then I left and we started Damson. Damson never really started this way as well, just to put it out there. We started actually as a consulting company because that's the only skill I had coming out of, at that time. But we evolved into impact investments later on. And part of the reason was because when I was doing all this consulting work, I had to go to second, third tier cities across Southeast Asia and meet these different companies and different networks, and realize that it's a very different struggle when someone is not just creating something for impact or creating for this idealistic kind of view of like creating a great unicorn, but we're creating companies because they just didn't have jobs. They just needed to create it. And that was such a different journey for me. It really inspired me. So I packed up and shifted the whole company that way. So that's why I do what I do.
That's a great story. So actually, I just want to go, what I love about this panel is that we've got kind of the generational differences. And so Mason, just when you hear these guys talk, and you go back to your beginnings as an impact investor, how has the world of impact investing changed?
Oh boy, that's a $1 million question. No, actually. When I started my social impact investing journey 10 years ago, 2011, 2012, the term impact measurement does not exist. Even as currently you quite familiar with 17 SDG goals, G9 IMP, that only exists like probably 4 or 5 years ago. So you can see the huge transformation of, I think it's good in the sense that people are taking it seriously, and I see more things. Even I can share with you, I was so shocked, during COVID-19, maybe I would use the time frame like even 1 year ago, ESG investing, I presume you understand what's ESG investing, was kind of like, it's nice to have. Today, ESG is mandatory, right? In the sense that if you don't have ESG, the investors are not interested to talk to you anymore. So I think the paradigm shift in thinking is happening. But and I still see that 10 years ago, definitely the ecosystem has become more mature, especially in Indonesia. Because of a lot of potential, low cost of entry, stuff like that. But I think what needs to shift is the mindset of the investors. That means prepare to take more risk, prepare to be more patient, and prepare to see where a different lens of looking at investing. But I really truly appreciate this player because it's not good to be the only impact investors in the room. I feel very lonely. It's good to have fellow impact investors journey together and share our learnings, our pains, our war scars. So I think that is what I really appreciate, that the ecosystem has grown. Thank you.
So actually, I just want to build on what you said about the
Sure.
mindset of investors. So can I ask you guys to chime in? What are, from your vantage point, what are we talking about here?
Leon, do you want to start? I wouldn't know which starting point to enter upon on this.
Okay. Let me take a stab at this. So the lens of investing that Mason is talking about is that let's envision what the world of investment sounded like, looked like, felt like for, let's just say, early stage investing or PE investing. So VC or PE, so if you guys hear that. You have people who come to the table and they say, look, we have a return requirement. We want you to go into a specific industry to achieve that, right? And do all this stuff. So we're going to give you the capital, you're going to give it to a company, and you're going to come back to me in like 9 years' time, and then you're going to give me this buttload more money, right? That's really it. Sorry, is that too much? Okay, I need to censor myself sometimes. So that's investing in general. Today, for us as investors in impact, we have to go to investors and say, please provide us this capital. We will take it and we'll deploy it to companies that share your values. Because it's no longer about taking capital and putting it wherever we want because we just care about the money back. I have to care that the company responds to the values of impact, because we not only want to create better jobs for individuals to give them more income, but we also have to ensure that in the way they do it, it is environmentally friendly. We cannot ignore that anymore. That's the reality of today. The lens of investors is recognizing that impact is not an easy journey. If you've been an entrepreneur, it's already tough running a business, right, as it is. And then you add on this layer where I have to go to my entrepreneurs and say, measure your impact, consider your impact, and think about the risk of your impact. And then they say, huh, what do you mean by that? Right? They're so confused. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, that's true. I am quite confusing. So let's simplify that. You need to measure it. So if you give them jobs, you count that. But number two, you got to make sure that the income that they're generating is, say, above, the minimum wage, right? So you have a very, very specific number. I can't just pay you and then win anymore. It's a very different world out there. So when we do that as an entrepreneur, you have to consider, okay, now I have to get them to a certain income. There are certain considerations I need to make. And the reason why patience is such an important thing is because we have to consider the way that we do business, the way that we develop the companies. Sometimes it takes longer to do it. So give an example. 2 companies that I talk about all the time. One is a company called Westbike here in Indonesia. We're the only logistics player from end to end that gives green logistics to the customer. That means we don't burn any fossil fuel, we use bicycles, and we basically have couriers that we take off the streets. So they are either youth at risk, marginalized youth with some limited disabilities, and we take them on, and then we train them and then get them out there. Now there are some challenges. Let's be clear about this. It's not an easy game. Bicycle couriers have a 2 to 3 time efficiency to a motorbike courier, easily, right? And we're very proud of that. But not everybody wants to ride a motorcycle. Not everybody wants to ride a bicycle. It's not easy. So we have to think of growth in a very different way. The appreciation of how we grow has to be unique. And therefore, I have to go back to my investors and say, okay, Grab and Gojek, we kind of sound like them, but we're not them. So remember that what we're here for is because of this impact. And that is a lens for impact investing that we're talking about. Consider how the business model shifts from traditional means because we also consider impact as well. Now, can we actually create unicorns in the impact investment industry? 100%. I guarantee you that. I won't get shot, hopefully. But I also want to make the promise that we always try, but we always want to make sure that we think about our beneficiaries and what we're doing. So for example, on the opposite side, I happen to be a co-founder of a company called Eden and Ellie. We work with adults with autism who can't get work. And because of the way that they work, we cannot just hire willy-nilly like 100 people and then start building it out. Because with autism, there are lots of psychological challenges. And the depth of impact for example, we hire a courier, they have a bicycle, and then we start working, we train them up. Very different. On-the-job skill training. But in autism, with our adults with autism, the artisans, we have to train them to be an artisan. We have to give them the right structure around everything. And it takes a lot of work for us to do it. We have to spend a lot of time. So that is slightly different in that sense, because we have a depth of impact that we have to consider to make it useful for them to be supported and be productive. So then we have to consider that in the lens of impact as well. So the lens of impact is a very adaptable, very flexible, very different, because it's nuanced, it's unique, but it's there because we want to make appropriate, responsible, right, and very authentic impact for people and the environment.
So on this you're saying adaptive, so that actually is a very nice segue to your whole world of you're facilitating adaptability
Yeah.
in many different dimensions.
Yeah, and I almost want to put a disclaimer that the approaches of Leon and Mason are outliers. To me, it's like we're speaking the same language. This is how I'm built. This is how we build social enterprises, right? But, you know, I was at AVPN, Asia Venture Philanthropy Networks conference earlier this year, and everyone's talking about bigger ticket sizes and more collaboration. But in reality, what we're seeing is them moving further away from the ground, moving further away from empathy, further away from understanding. Because running a business is hard. Running a social enterprise is harder. Running a social enterprise in Cambodia with marginalised communities is almost insanity. Like, it takes a special kind of entrepreneur. But when you get a funder that says, well, you should be like this because, you know, I've been in this job for 2 years now and my conscience is amazing, and I walked into a set of structures that I'm not allowed to change. I don't feel like I should change. And by the way, I'm in my comfort zone. How dare you make me stop watching a movie about saving the kid in the rain on the TV and make me put on my slippers and go outside and help the kid who's standing in the rain? Thanks. Audience of one, you can all clap later. Right? But this is what we face, and it's getting further away. As the ecosystem evolves, right? You know, Iris is great, Gin is great, but do the farmers really care? You know, the biggest issue I have is exactly what Leon has. When I work with solar entrepreneurs, you need to measure the impact, because that is the power of the story, and it's the narrative that will get you over the line or get you in the door with funders, right? But it's always the founders chasing the funders. And what we want to do with the Adaptive Collective is say, as we said before, let's not fix the founders. Let's fix the funders. Because the women that I work with in Cambodia, culturally, they're actually far ahead of everyone else in the way that they do business and do enterprise and impact. Okay, so maybe their accounting systems aren't necessarily 100% where you want them. But if you take traditional VC or the way a lot of impact investment is now, then they'll get overlooked, right? And then, but we know from the proof of the work we do, the Red Hat does with microfinance in Kenya, Kayleen's got some perfect examples of women founders taking loans, buying up all of post-harvest. So there's so many metrics in here against post-harvest loss, making a product, selling the product, paying back the loan, repeat. You do that a couple of times, and then they're talking about $1 million in equity. But the question is, what if they never got that support? They're all just going to keep going. So the next question is, why aren't they getting that support? Why isn't the capital shifting? Why isn't the capital adaptive? And I can tell you why. Because funders are scared. They're risk averse. They don't want to take the pressure of and the time of going back up to their mandate and saying, what if we change this just a little bit? And the thing that annoyed me most about AVPN is the VP is venture philanthropy. Philanthropic ventures. These are the people that should be able to go back and say, hey, maybe we should just play in the pool a little bit. It's not really going to burn anything. And this is the argument that we had 10 years ago in Australia. Is that why can't you shift some of your corpus to this? Especially for philanthropics that are giving away grants. I mean, come on, you're writing that capital off anyway. What if you write it off and it does amazing things through uncollateralized debt? Then you get the returns and the great impact story, and then you get to go back and watch your TV and tell all your friends. Anyway, close brackets, rant over.
Okay. So actually, I've got another question. But as anyone out there, if you have questions, just start to put your hands up, and we'll be glad to just open this up to everybody here as well. But I guess you mentioned risk, so I want to go back and actually just talk about risk a little bit. I mean, how do you manage? Thank you very much. How do you manage risk or perceived risk? How do you talk about risk?
There are many different types of risks, that's for sure. But before I talk about risk, I must remind everyone there's no such thing as a risk-free investment. Okay? And I'm sure you understand the term low risk, low return. High risk, high return. You cannot say, I want low risk but high return. Unfortunately, most of the capital holders are spoiled by bankers, and bankers promising low risk, high return. So let's go back to talk about risk. For us, when you look at social impact investing deals, transaction, the biggest risk is not financial risk, because we have a group of financial experts, people who know how to structure a deal, be it a debt or equity or blended finance. Bankers are very creative, so you don't have to worry about tell them what to structure. The biggest risk for us is actually character risk of the social entrepreneurs. That's why we spend a lot of time doing due diligence on the character of the social enterprise, because it is something that it's very hard to be documented. It's very hard to measure. Oh, I out of 1 out of 10, what's my rating of trusting Leon? I cannot say quantify by 7.5 or 8. You can't. You just cannot. It's a human touch thing. But why is that is important? Because business model will continue to change. Okay? If somebody tell you your business model never change, it's crazy. You don't trust the guy. But you know one thing, if you trust the person who share the same value with you in terms of being passionate about helping the certain group of people, your business model can change by the circumstances, by the economy, which is fine. You need to be adaptable to that. So I think number one biggest risk is character risk of the social entrepreneurs. Second risk I must highlight is beyond our control is things like COVID-19, right? Having said that, how you respond to risk is also very critical, right? What saddened me was during COVID-19, I heard some of the MFI pull out from the Indonesian market during COVID-19. I said, that is actually the time that these people need the money. Why are we pulling out of financing from them? That means you are not interested to help these people. You are more interested to make your money work for yourself, not for them. So I think all this will reveal the true color of the investors. So I think it's very important you speak to the right investor, you accept the right investors, and make sure that they share your values. I think it's more important. So I think these are the non-financial risks I talk about. Financial risks, I think I will leave it to the rest to discuss.
I just want to add to that quickly, because we train a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, and one of the weirdest cases we've had is almost like a divorce proceeding between founders this year, right? Oh no, like a version of Mean Girls. Oh, I don't want to talk to him because, I felt you might have been the youngest and got the pop reference. If not, it's Leon, but But what a lot of the things that we talked to them about, and is about sort of resilient entrepreneurship and opening them up to really engage with investors. So we talk about, okay, what's the cost of money? And Cambodia, a lot of the capital that comes in is still development capital. So there's Then we talk about what are the requirements of money, like what's the reporting like. And then the third thing we talk about, look, if you're going for investment and it is strangely skewed into Cambodia, like if you're an angel investor, it doesn't matter how much money you give someone, you're getting 50%. That's how it is. So when we get founders coming to us, they're like, oh, I got told this. They're not trained to ask questions. And trained's probably too strong a word. But, you know, so the first thing we say is, other than just validate every assumption possible, is that talk to if you go to 5 mentors with the same question, you're going to get 5 different answers, right? Building that into a founder to be curious and inquisitive and testing everything is one thing, but then also saying to them, when you go for investment, take the same approach. And it's really important that, from what Mason's saying, is getting that alignment is one of the first things you should look at. And we say to them, it's like a dance, you know, go and have the first dance. If it feels good, maybe we'll come back for a second date. We were joking about Tinder before, right? I mean, yeah, have a couple of Tinder dates with your investors. One of them will feel like you want to have maybe an after dinner mint, and then talk to them a bit more. But in Cambodia, a lot of it is, oh, well, I talked to this one person, so I have to go with them. It's like, no, you don't. An investor wants to put their money somewhere. They don't care about you. They'll take you off. They'll swipe left or right. I don't know. I'm married. My wife won't let me have Tinder for some reason, you know. But the investor will look at where their best money is, and the entrepreneur should look at who is the best fit with the capital they get coming in. And I think that's one of the big things now we're seeing is that, yeah, if you are getting a funder that's very demanding and you need to spend time on your business, they're not the match for you. If you get a funder that says, look, and definitely I think this is what's great about Mason and Leon and Damson is they get it. You know, and definitely because you're an entrepreneur as well as an investor, right? So yeah, if they can have that empathy and you can have that conversation at the early stage, you build a relationship, and that's what should be looking at for impact investment as well. The relationships that's there, because when COVID hits, it's the character of the founder and the relationship you have with them that really matters the most.
Oh, I thought we said a lot already. Okay, so I'll think of it from maybe a different lens. So when we say funders, for the entrepreneurs in the room, you think it's us. Good for you. But the unfortunate truth is that we as fund managers are funding you, but there's other people behind us who are funding us. So we have to manage 2 things. So if you think our jobs are, nice and dandy, like, think again. So let's pull the rug out of this one. Number 1, we have to go to you with the sensations and feelings of investors behind me. We have to carry that burden to go to you. And then, on the basis of that, have the trust with you that along the way, hopefully we have the relationship. When times get tough, we can help you can help us, and we can come to agreement about how we can manage any risk, including COVID. Now, when we have that relationship, that's great. We're very lucky at Damson. We went out we went 2020 February, before a lot of the lockdowns happened. We sent out a note to all our entrepreneurs and said, you got to be careful with this. It's going to be bigger than you think. Don't brush it off. And we had one of the founders specifically come back to us, had a conversation. He said, okay, I hear you. I trust you. We're going to wait for these milestones to know how bad it is. And on the basis of that, we're going to actually right-size the company. We're going to figure out how do we support everybody, keep all our beneficiaries. And thankfully, they listened, they heard us, they do it. That's good relationship. That's trust, and that's values in action, which you share with your investor. So that's great. So think of the same relationship when I have with my investor who gives me the money. When they come to me, they say, Leon, everything's going to happen in the world. How are you going to manage the risk, right? And then they're going to be asking me things like, everything from what if the sun doesn't shine, enough for the agriculture, like land, to questions like how do we actually support, a founder who decided to give up next week. Or even questions like, what if the founder is not spending enough on marketing, right? How do we support that? Or how do we coach them into spending a little bit more when they should? So we're answering all these questions at the back of our minds as well, right? And so if someone came to you during the Tinder date, right, and said that we couldn't invest in this, it's not because the investor had like the fund manager had an issue with you, they have also other people they have to answer to. So one proxy I would really suggest to many entrepreneurs is ask, what is the relationship? What do your investors like about impact investing or like about my company if we could share them our story? And that's really nice because you get to sit in their shoes and understand where they're coming from and understand why they will be selecting you or not. Not every entrepreneur or social enterprise is the cup of tea of everyone. It's okay. You just got to find the right one to support you because they themselves as fund managers, we're also representing a lot of other people who may not understand your story as much, and that's why they support us to go and learn about your story. So if anything, give them a break, right? That's number one. And the second is just recognize that it's all coming from somewhere. It's not something that we make up as well all the time. Yeah.
Just to add on comments, one of my biggest fear as a fund manager, biggest fear, when my investors start to tell me things that I did not hear from you.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because I'm supposed to trust my investee, right? But if my investors start hearing news about things in the market about you, how am I supposed to respond? That is the scary part, because either I'm not doing my job or you're doing something behind my back that I do not know. That's why you talk about the importance of trust and accountability, right? The last thing you want is, if what my investor is true, I'm in trouble because my investor will not trust me anymore.
We have that at our level with early stage too. And we say you've always got to communicate because we're out there advocating for you to build the stories to get the capital. And, you know, one of the founders we work with recently, she decided not to come to the training anymore and just put in a staff member. Now, he ended up being fantastic. But then what we're finding out is that the other founder's taken out, as we're meant to be sort of preparing them to start looking at capital, is taken out a $200,000 loan. And we know that because the staff member's bonus, performance-based, was on, well, it's performance-based, so he was providing ideas, and this is how we could get operational efficiency, so he could do that. And it's almost like, why are you telling me this? He's like, well, the 200,000's come in, and not all of it is being used on the business mission. So he felt the disconnect and the dissonance, and then came to us, of which, you know, you're like, what do you do? I mean, this is what they should be talking to you because you're out there representing them. And if the founder doesn't have that respect for you as well, then, and don't communicate, then it's super dangerous. Super dangerous for us because it's our social capital, it's our professional networks that they're burning because of a lack of care.
What questions does anybody out there have? Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Oh boy.
All right. So actually,
Change our minds. Change our
actually,
minds.
let's try without a microphone. So one more time, right here in the front with the yellow lanyard.
Hello, my name is Tom. I'm the founder of a social enterprise in Singapore called Seven Fifteen, who recently completed our first capital raise in the Northeast Family Office. And this is more a question looking forward. I think with the kind of macroeconomic state of the world and interest where it is, we have seen and we've read about a tightening market for many of the traditional ways of non-impact
Yes.
related VC. Now, how applicable is this to the impact space, considering that we also hear that there is a lack of opportunity sometimes? Do you think one can offset the
Shall we take a few questions and answer it together? Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Actually, I think it is a little bit hard to hear. Oh, that's great.
Hello everybody, my name is Siddharth. I come from Mumbai, India. I represent an organization called Govardhan Eco Village. We are a United Nations body awarded Eco Village, a model community, and we've been working with more than 1 million tribal families in India. Our core focus is that we build livelihoods for them through education, healthcare, skill development, women empowerment, literacy programs. And my question is, because I come from the not-for-profit space, I want to understand the route that we have been taking as impact VCs or impact PEs. How do we integrate the not-for-profit arm together? Because that's where the future lies between both. Because we cannot be looking at both for-profit social enterprises and not-for-profit social enterprises differently, because we are doing the same goal.
Why don't we take one more, and then we'll do another round? Yeah. We'll come back.
Thank you. I'm from Jakarta. Assuming or knowing that you are investor, suppose I have three questions. The first one is, how do you assess looking for partners, good partners? Second, how do you monitor to convince that everything is all right, or everything is everything is good, it's prospective? And then the third one, how do you measure the impact, the social impact that you mentioned, that this is a social business? Thank you.
This will just free up some space. The biggest misnomer about impact, and from even when I was doing it at my master's, that everyone thinks it needs to be this big thing, right? And this also answers your question. What do you need it for? Who is the audience and what are you trying to prove or measure? If you're just trying to say, right, there's a family of 5, you know, the parents go out and work, and you need that for a small donor or your funder, that's what you write for, unless you're trying to climb a massive mountain, and then you need to integrate really, I would say hardcore, but like very specific data metrics from the start. Like, I'm going to go back to Kayleen again. Like, her 2-page talks exactly about what gender and climate metrics she has got, because it's been embedded from the start, because Athena and Biduk know where they're going and they know what needs to be told. And another good example of this is ATEC's impact flywheel. I mean, the short version is they're basically measuring their impact, knowing that that's exactly what their funders want. So the first thing is, what's the audience? What are you collecting it for? If you're just collecting it so you can prove to yourself or families can see their own progress, to me that's just as important as, you know, doing it for $1 million raise. In terms of whether it's a hybrid model or non-profit, it should come down to a couple of very simple pathways. Where is your money coming from? What are you going to do with it? And do you need to pay it back? Then you need to take it into country-specific context around the legal authorities around that, right? What do they do? How do you bring the money in? Again, how do you pay it back? And then the third one is, who's funding you as well? I mean, it kind of ties into what I've just said, and this is part of the reason why we're starting the Adaptive Collective. You know, we want to raise a revolving debt fund, base it in Singapore, but then use entrepreneur support organisations around the region to provide us that localised context for the deployment of capital, because we can't solve everything ourselves. So you basically try and take a much more structured approach to looking at it. There's no one simple answer other than sort of looking at those 3 lenses.
Okay, this is the tax of being the youngest on the panel. You have to answer first. Okay, so let me take the macro question. I think it's a really good one, but I'll take that last. For nonprofits and social enterprises, the spirit of what they're doing is exactly the same. What we are challenged with, or what you're challenged with, is actually more a regional challenge or question. Because Latin America and North America actually do have foundations that fund nonprofits and invest in nonprofits, because they instead of doing equity investments, they do debt investments, even to nonprofit schools that catalyze the school to expand the capacity and therefore actually increase their revenue over the longer run. So that's a few methods that they are doing. We don't see so much of it here. We see it, I think, in a couple of organizations, like I think the Mohammed Yunus kind of collective actually was trying that for a little bit. And although we don't have a very big space of investing in nonprofits yet. So definitely very interesting space. We have seen it in areas of potentially education, especially for early age education, because investing in that is very troublesome from a market-based perspective. But we're also seeing it with foundations or debt funds or microfinance funds that actually use the same model to support cooperatives, because most impact investors who are equity investors can't go into cooperatives, for example. So I think that's a really interesting point. Big gap, got to think about it more. Thank you. What was the other question in the back? Oh, the assessment. Maybe I'll just touch the assessment. So on the assessment, I think we talked about some of that. right? The part of apart from just the what do you call it, the impact metrics and also the founder, what we're looking for is examples and capacity for success. So does the team have the right expertise to be able to drive the success of the company and the product or service? Now, if they don't have certain types of expertise, that's okay. We can complement that. We're part of different networks that we can bring experts to the table, but we need to know. The second is that every investor, we usually have a view of what they can and cannot do. So for example, industries, but more importantly, in certain teams or technology, they would want to look out for certain things that they feel has a very compelling way of delivering impact and delivering financial returns. Okay, so I think those are two things it is. The two parts is we're looking for factors for success, and the other circle is that we're looking for factors that hamper success. And anything that hampers success, we want to have a very honest conversation and understanding what could hamper it. For example, if you're in the agriculture space, we have seen some social enterprises where they are so passionate, so learned in it, but they actually don't have a degree in agriculture and they don't actually have an agriculture expert. It happens. And it's okay. We can work with that, right? But they have to be upfront, they have to be honest, and they have to be aware that they have a gap. The second is success factors. The team, the technology, and whether the market that they're addressing is sizable enough to grow the business. Okay? Those are really key factors that we look out for in the assessment. Okay? Macro factor, I'll just address that. Macro factors, not many people are talking about it, huge implications, don't know exactly how it's going to affect it, but I think one of the biggest red herring, like white elephants in the room. Will it have an effect? My projection is yes, it will affect anybody that touches a dollar in the space of finance for investing. Why? Because risk-free rates are changing, the way that we think about investments change, but because, as you can tell with the macro view, as of today, we just had another 0.75 adjustment, right, in the interest rates of the Feds. But we still have a few more that are coming up. So that adjustments are not done. The real stability happens once the markets come to a little bit more of a stable position, once everybody catches up with good news and bad news, in a space where McKinsey just announced in the last few days that 80% of a lot of executives, or executives they surveyed, expect a recession. So I think that where Sequoia came out and talked to founders about what to expect in a recession, how to adapt to it, I think very good advice. Everyone should be thinking about it. You don't have to throw away everything as well, but be very mindful how you're going to work in that risky financial economic climate, period. So we'll see more of that soon.
Okay, I know there's one more question, but maybe I'll answer that question. You can come back to that. To answer the gentleman's question about the how and why, I think the more important thing is you need to have to know your own strategy, your framework. What would you like to see? Because as a so-called private capital holder, your own money, you can decide how you want to see your capital change the world, more than just delivery or 10x return. Or you just want to say, I want to see more women being saved. I want to see more children go to school. Or I want more clean water be accessible. It's determined by you. So there's no textbook answer here, like how to do. It's all very depend on your individual preferences. Some just want checkbox approach. Some just want to say, no, I want to make sure I can touch 10,000 women's lives. So depend on what you're looking at, because remember one thing, data collection is not free. It's going to cost you money. Okay? A lot of people say, I want data. But a very simple example, if you invest in a project that costs $100,000, you invest $100,000, just for hypothetical question. And somebody say, oh, I want a data metrics, but do you know it costs $20,000 to do the data metric measurement? It's just not practical, right? You got $100,000 investment, you spend $20,000, and only $80,000 go to the ground. It's not going to make sense. I said, you want 20,000, you want to do impact measurement, increase your investment amount from 100,000 to 500,000. Then it makes sense to spend that $20,000. So I think sometimes we financial professionals are too wired of certain things to be done, but we have to look at from a very pragmatic standpoint. So again, I don't have a textbook answer on like how do you measure. I mean, it all depends on you. It has to be really more of a discussion framework. I think the framework I talk about, refer here, is theory of change. Like how can your capital bring positive change to the, not just the social enterprise, but also the community that the social enterprise is located. That is very important because you will never be satisfied. You will always say, why the return is so low? Why your impact? So I'm going to ask you, is 10,000 women, 10,000 family enough for you? Too small, too big? You know, you have to decide. So I think we need to manage expectation as part of communication. I hope I answered that gentleman's question about framework is very important. Thank you.
I just want to echo in a way what Mason and Leon have both said. It's up to you, right? And don't let anyone push you around to that. So for me, if we provide you with capital, my concern is, yeah, how are you going to pay it back, right? What are you going to do to make the return to pay me back? But if you are providing dignified employment for 10 people with high severity mental illness, that is just as impactful for me as providing education for 10,000 youth. It's up to you, right? It's your story, it's your narrative, it's your impact. Find the capital that matches what you want to do, because the moment you start adapting or shifting what your mission is to fit the capital, then it never feels quite the same for you when you're delivering it, and it never feels quite the same when you're measuring it or providing it back to them. So stay true to what you're doing and educate people along the way. 10 people or 10,000. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Kayleen Alvarez. I'm the founder and CEO of Athena Global that Ian keeps mentioning. And I guess my question is more strategic for the panelists, especially for Mason and Leon, because you're working in a 9+2 fund. And my question is this: if we're really trying to get impact with nonprofits or social entrepreneurs or working with vulnerable populations or underrepresented founders, what's the role of blended finance in the capital stack, especially if you're operating within the confines of a more restrictive fund structure? And we may need to continue this over a beer, but...
Do we have any other questions? I'll give you actually, strangely enough, Kayleen, thank you for, can I borrow your mic?
Melanie, what's our timing?
Do we have any other?
Maybe 10 more,
Do we have
10.
time for one more round?
10 more minutes.
I think,
We have to close in 10 more minutes.
Okay.
so, oh, sorry.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Just hands up. Otherwise, we can focus on this and then wrap up. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick intro so they can prepare for the more technical one. Again, it's going to depend on who you're talking to and funding. So ATEC, biogas initially was their initial business. Their blended finance is coming through. They've had their Series A. Then they picked up, I think, maybe, no, I'm not going to disclose it, but a lot of money in a convertible. And then they came to Red Hat and said, look, we really want to invest in clean cooking. And so then they picked up a syndicated debt for like 140,000, the loan details on the website. Now, if you talk to anyone else, they're like, oh, debt's bad. Don't put debt on your books. But it's about how you strategically use the capital, the blended capital for different parts, and you can explain it to the point where when these guys come along with looking at their risk profile, you can satisfy them in how you're going to use the blended capital and where, in a way that it doesn't then make you fearsome that you're not going to pay it back. That's probably the layman's version. Now for the technical.
So I will share a bit of some of the secrets what fund managers is doing. Okay.
Giving it away.
Not really. Because we are fund manager, we manage a portfolio, right? So we have committed certain financial returns and so-called non-financial return to the investors, right? Investors not going to look at 20 portfolio companies. They're going to look like overall. So we have to decide some of the companies will have higher financial returns but lower social impact returns. right? And some will have higher social impact return, but lower financial return, the risk, right? Don't forget, we still have failure risk to take care of about as well. So the investor doesn't care how many fail. The investor just care overall how much I'm getting my money back. So there is no, so it depends. So we like to create the stories, right? Some love your stories, but you know the financial risk is too high. Very hard to get a kind of return. But some stories are a bit down, but you can have certainty of financial returns. So there is a mixture. But I want to highlight is that we don't work alone. We like to work in the ecosystem. That we talk about blended finance, first loss capital, even getting grants is good. But more importantly is whether you are a grant maker, a foundation, patient capital investors. When you all come together, you must have the same shared vision, right? Because you don't want to give the entrepreneurs nightmare. They need to manage different funders' expectation. And it's not their strength, their job. One thing I learned is that most, if not all, social entrepreneurs are passionate about their work, but they are not financially savvy people. I can tell you, if you give them a 20 pages, anything more than 20 pages financial document, they will just give up on you. They just couldn't understand the terminology, convertible, first right refuser, They don't understand that. So I think that's what I want to highlight a bit of, not say the complexity, but the reality of the ground. And our job is not to protect us. Our job is to make sure the social entrepreneurs succeed. Because we can only be successful if they are successful.
Blended finance. So blended finance, maybe I'll approach it also a different way from Ian and Mason. For every dollar that is given by an investor, it will come with a certain baggage of expectation, or sometimes positive expectation. What we're trying to do with blended finance is to do it in a way where everybody succeeds as a community and an ecosystem, and that when we all come together, there's a high chance of success, right? Because every time we give one check and we say we're the only investor in it, we've been in those positions, it's a dangerous position to be in, because it's like having only one parent instead of two, right? It could always be better, because you can play tag along between yourself and your wife to go pick up the kids, but you can't do that if you only have that one parent, right? Sometimes. So I think having the different people come together is very important. If we come with the right awareness and honesty and sincerity about what that $1 is supposed to be doing, then blended finance approaches work beautifully. Because then it comes together, and so we work with RISE, which is funded by USAID and Swiss Contact, to provide debt alongside our equity investments. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Because there are times where the founders like the equity injection but don't like the debt investment. But sometimes we could complement it in such a way where it's better. Now, why is that important? Well, equity investments do wonders for specific ways. Fundamentally, the writings on the wall for equity investment is growth of a company, growth of staff, and some elements of working capital. But sometimes, depending on the industry, the working capital line doesn't work for an equity investor, and it's not really worth putting so much expectation, because an equity investor is looking at returns in the multiples. A convertible debt, a debt investor is in the expectation of a percentage. Maybe it's a double-digit percentage, it's a high percentage, fair enough, but it's still a very different return expectation to an equity investor. So the question is, for every dollar that's put in, so long as you're honest with what it can do and what is expected of them, then it comes together. Then when a grant funder comes over and says, we're going to help with capacity building in specific areas, for example, agriculture company does not have said agriculture specialist, then maybe that could be supportive, right, in that way. Because that is not, you don't need it as a hire which is the equity investor's question. You don't need it to do working capital, which is most likely a debt investor question. It could be something like a special projects agriculture specialist. And that's maybe a grant funder perspective that could come in. And so I think so long as we're all participating in the ecosystem with the right expectations, I think that would be, yes. So I would definitely see that as important. Now, if I think what you're trying to go at was talking about the stacking of types of investors, a capital stack, and whether there's an ideal number for each of it in the stack, I honestly don't know. I haven't thought about it. I think it's a very useful question to be asking. But I do know that it's appropriate to the level where, from a first principles basis, if the capital and the expectation is aligned to the activity, good. That's it. That's how I would measure it on that basis. But unfortunately, I can't give you a view of how to build that stack. Yeah.
On that note, Ian?
No, I was just going to say it's a co-parenting agreement, right?
Okay. That's a good final statement. Have you got something you agree? Yeah.
Let me give you a quick one from our conversation in the basement that really simplified it. I think from the first time I met Leon and Mason for today. When we talk about risk and mandates, it's effectively like, how late will your parents let you to go out for the party, right? Some parents will say, right, I need you to be home by 9, and I'm very strict on what I'm going to do with you. Someone's like, I'll go and have a little bit of fun, be home by 11. And then I think Leon was saying, Mason's like, oh, look, just see if you come home disheveled at 3 a.m., which is not true of his work, I'm sure. But it is, the very simple part is, the risk profile, finding what's aligned for you. And even then, the reason I wanted to bring this back is sometimes you have to co-parent and you have to have these agreed things at the start, which goes back to what Mason was talking. When you're finding your investor, find the alignment, tell them exactly what you want, have the conversation. If it's not aligned, it's okay to walk away. You just don't swipe right the next time.
Leon,
last thought. I don't know. I don't know how to beat the curfew thing. That's like hilarious. Co-create it. Yeah, exactly. I think that impact investing that we are talking today, take it as a part of the journey of maturing impact investments in Asia. Very specifically, when you look at mature markets in Africa, Latin America for it, it's evolved into a very, very different part. They do a lot more financing of cooperatives and nonprofits in, say, Latin America than they do in Asia. And frankly, I don't know if we really will have the flavor for it either. It will continuously evolve. And I think it's really a question of what the needs are on the ground and how we respond to it as investors, as founders, and as the big LPs behind us as well. So it's constantly evolving. Don't take it as written truth. You're part of writing it. So if you are founders who are trying to push the needle, in itself, I found it useful when I came in from the fintech side of things, instead of just coming from impact all the time, was that we get to go back to investors and tell them, let's have a conversation. I know you have a different mandate, but think of it this way. Think of it uniquely, because they are not in your shoes. The best people who know what's happening on the ground are you guys, right? Or people on the ground. And that, I think, is really critical. Always have that conversation, the value alignment.
I think I like to encourage everybody to think that there is different expressions of impact investing. Just like what Ian did, Leon did, and I did. And even there are more, I'm sure there are some of you. Each of us is different. But doesn't mean he's right or I'm wrong or I'm right, he's wrong. Just the different expressions. And you just have to be aligned with the values of the investors. Not every investor think alike. You just have to go and be bold and ask questions, ask investor questions, not your typical interview questions, but ask really hard questions. What do you like about my business? Why should I let you in? Be bold, because you may find out, oh, I like you because I like you always wear pink. I said, what does it do with me? But these are questions you need to ask, hard questions. So it is, well, I'm not saying that. But I think it's important to ask now than regret later, right? Because investment is like a marriage. It's a 10 years journey. Okay, so I think you gotta ask hard questions. Don't be afraid to ask investors hard questions. We welcome hard questions, just like we ask you very hard questions. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Shall we put our hands together and say thank you so much, guys? Thank you all for coming. What an amazing conversation. Thanks for the great questions, and go and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you. Oh my gosh, you guys are so much fun.
Announce about Impact Cafe downstairs.
Oh. Go for it. I have no idea.
Okay, so what's happening right now is 4:30.